So, PissedMagistus, I believe is how it's pronounced, is one of my favorite Instagram accounts, period. In this video that he posted,
there's a right and a wrong way to protest. Okay, well, can we burn the flag? No, you can't disrespect the flag. Can we wave another flag? No, you can't wave another flag.
See, this is exactly why an authoritarian cannot be in charge of making the rules within which rebellion against their authority is allowed to happen. They will always make rules that determine any effective rebellion to be illegal, and therefore any legal rebellion to be meaningless.
Powerful people dictate the rules on how people can express dissent with how they're managing their power. I think everybody, can feel it, why that's ridiculous.
This way they can keep talking about supporting freedom of expression and right to protest while simultaneously removing any kind of effective resistance against their authority. Kind of what authoritarians do, right? That's why we call them authoritarian.
Something that I think is left out of this line of reasoning that is of strategic importance is that just because someone has made it against the rules doesn't make it effective. I want to actually take the example of flag burning. So let's just say you are looting a burning house, right? You're carving up a country and giving contracts to your friends to basically not even have to fulfill on them. And you don't care about the country at all. You don't care about its people. The best costume to wear in order to serve your interests is the costume of a super patriot. So you'll come down on people really hard for burning the flag, because basically what you want to do is protect yourself from the genuine patriots, from the masses of genuine patriots, by convincing them that you are one of them while you steal other stuff. So you just think about it. Burning a flag doesn't accomplish anything, right? You can do it. And I'm not saying it should be legal, because it creates this weird paradox where it's like, if it was actually legal, would that be a better protest? And it's just this kind of round and round sort of nonsense gambit. But the fact of the matter is, setting a flag on fire publicly doesn't actually express any, it expresses an emotional discontent, but it doesn't offer any solutions. It doesn't offer any kind of articulate, high fidelity expression of what a person is discontented about. And so burning the flag is very obviously an example of a person not really getting a clear message across, but that's most of protesting, really. And so just because there's resistance to a protest doesn't mean that protest would be effective with or without that resistance. As a matter of fact, it's possible that the resistance is provided because that gives the most cathartic effect and actually keeps the people pacified. They're not being pacified because they're being effectively quelled in the streets. They're being pacified by the fact that they went out and they felt like they pushed as hard as they could on something and, got, some kind of angst out. They made their point. They were a part of the solution. Just look at these things strategically. There have been lots of times in history where protests have been a component of a larger strategy. I've been a part of some of those. And it is basically never, probably absolutely never, a matter of protesting, even in mass in a prolonged campaign, itself creating any sort of strategic win. With, one of the largest continued eras of protest right around the turn of the century that created, labor protections, there was a lot of interruption to the actual power flows of commerce. That was when, the Wobblies were protesting for lots of, for workplace safety, for the minimum wage, for the 40-hour work week, et cetera. And that period of time included organized strikes, organized disruptions to the supply chain of commerce, lots and lots of negotiations, reading of legislation, of bills, haggling with representatives. Protests were, that was just a very, very small piece of letting the general public that wasn't involved know that something serious was going on. Protest is never the lion's share of strategy, and being involved in protest movements and no other part of any political action means that essentially you are a body being leveraged for someone else's agenda. And sometimes if you're not actually in intimate dialogue with and know that agenda, then you're being used for something that maybe you wouldn't support in the end. This happens a lot. This happened, famously with, Lucky Strike co-opting a contingent of the feminist movement to increase select portions of the feminist agenda that were in the interest of corporations, namely smoking. At that time, there are a lot of other, ways that all sorts of movements, the civil rights movement was co-opted by different companies and political interests. And currently the movement for Black Lives, that, especially in 2020, JP Morgan came in and co-opted that. So if you're just showing up as a body or just doing your minimum part, posting trending political slogans on social media, it may be that you are lending yourself as general fodder for usually corporate interests, sometimes political interests that have an agenda that is subtly different than the one you want to be supporting. So that's just a few things to think about with protests. Just because there's opposition to it doesn't mean it's effective, doesn't mean it's a part of a coherent strategy that's going to ultimately create change, not the change you want to see. All right, just some food for thought. Go ahead and think on that for a little bit and look closely under the agenda of anyone who's calling you to action. Cheers.